This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the changing political landscape in Israel, how right-wing competition and Prime Minister Netanyahu's COVID vaccine campaign could affect the elections. Also, Netanyahu approves more building in Israel's biblical heartland. How will the incoming Biden administration react? Plus, Middle East analyst Joel Rosenberg discusses the growing threat of Iran and Israel Rising, a prophetic look at the growth of Israel. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. In just over 2 months, Israelis will head to the polls for the 4th time in 2 years. This time, significant changes on the political landscape could have a major impact on the results. The latest election cycle began in late December when Israel's parliament couldn't pass a budget. Failure to meet the deadline automatically triggered the new election, now scheduled for March 23rd. It also ends the 7-month-long contentious coalition led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and retired Chief of Staff Benny Gantz.
The way it looks like the national camp, the right-wing parties will get more support. You know, parties like the Labour Party, blue and white, I'm not sure we will see them in a few months. But within the right-wing parties, you have a split between those who support the Prime Minister and those who are not willing to cooperate with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Middle East analyst Joel Rosenberg says the new election landscape poses a major challenge to Netanyahu and the Likud party because of challenges from the right.
Here's the key. More and more leaders of the smaller parties are saying they will never serve in a Netanyahu government. That is getting close to a critical mass. But if they can't build a coalition, because the leaders of almost every other party says they won't serve with Netanyahu, and he's got a huge problem on his hands.
Gideon Sa'ar is now Netanyahu's main challenger. Once a Likud party leader and the Prime Minister's cabinet secretary, he's moved to form his own party called New Hope.
So now there is a real full-right Likud-type alternative. And that's a chink in the armor of Netanyahu, both because he left the party and because he's a legitimate leader and because he said, and people believe him, he will not sit with Netanyahu.
Netanyahu is putting his campaign's hope on successfully leading Israel out of the COVID pandemic. Israel currently leads the world in vaccinations per capita, and Netanyahu seeks to reopen Israel in time for the March election and Passover. The coronavirus has hit Israel hard.
This is a very big issue, and Israel has never dealt with an economic crisis of this magnitude. So Israelis are very concerned. It affects everything, but they also feel that their leadership, their elected leadership, kind of abandoned them for personal reasons.
Other factors Israeli voters will likely consider include the Iranian threat, Netanyahu's upcoming corruption trial, and the potential impact of a Biden administration on issues like the Abraham Accords. Despite Netanyahu's challenges, Likud remains Israel's strongest political party. If Netanyahu can show significant progress against the coronavirus pandemic, expand the Abraham Accords, and keep Iran at bay, he could again confound experts who have his political obituary already written. The fractured political landscape, however, makes predicting this election's outcome extremely difficult. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has made a bold move that some say could anger President-elect Joe Biden days before his inauguration. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
The move in question? Prime Minister Netanyahu's authorization to build hundreds of housing units in Judea and Samaria.
It's important to understand that now we are entering a more difficult time with President Biden, who will soon be coming into office. And so Netanyahu is trying to take advantage of the moment before Biden takes office to create a few facts on the ground.
Netanyahu has his own political concerns as well, with Israel facing another election in March.
One way of getting support from the right-wing voters is by announcing there's going to be new building in Judea and Samaria. It doesn't mean he's going to follow through on it after he's elected.
100 of the 800 approved housing units are in Tal Menashe, the home of the late Esther Horgan. She died in a terror attack while walking near her home last month.
I think it's a suitable answer to the horrific murder that happened here 3 weeks ago, where our enemies here are trying to end life. We intend to add life. There will be some sort of retribution. We will add more life here and add more families here, and our enemies will know that the murder will not help them and will not benefit them in any way.
Reclaimed during the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel considers Judea and Samaria its biblical heartland, promised to the Jewish people by God. Palestinians and much of the world call it the West Bank, view it as occupied territory, and want to see it become part of a Palestinian state. David Rubin, former Shiloh mayor and author of Trump and the Jews, said Trump has been very good for Israel.
President Trump has been the best president in the history of United States-Israel relations.
Among his accomplishments are recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem.
That's a fait accompli. Biden's not going to go back on that. Then, of course, the recognition of the strategic Golan Heights in the north as Israel's sovereign territory. The recognition that the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are not illegal, which is a big change from what Obama, Bush, Clinton, what they all were saying before that.
And in a dramatic shift of U.S. policy, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently became the first top U.S. diplomat to visit Jewish communities in Israel's biblical heartland. Palestinians were angered by many things Trump did, including his Jerusalem moves, defunding of the UN body responsible for Palestinian refugees, and the Abraham Accords between Israel and 4 Arab states. While Biden is considered to be a friend of Israel, he is also expected to be more sympathetic toward the Palestinians. Rubin says he hopes Biden won't pressure Israel to give away its biblical heritage.
Being fair-handed means that you do what's right. And what's right is that the land of Israel was given by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the people of Israel. That's what's right. And that's what Joe Biden has to learn about.
Meanwhile, the foreign ministers of Germany, France, and Jordan met in Egypt. They released a statement urging the resumption of credible negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians and reaffirmed their support for a two-state solution. So for Israel, the heat is on. Some fear the favor Israel had with Washington during the last 4 years is likely to be replaced by pressure the Jewish state felt before Trump took office. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Billionaire casino magnate Sheldon Adelson has died at the age of 87. The son of immigrants, he was a fervent supporter and major donor of Republican, Jewish, and Israeli causes, and a champion of the Jewish state.
One must understand that Sheldon was a giant Jewish patriot. He worked to strengthen Israel, to strengthen the ties with the United States, to strengthen ties with the diaspora.
Sheldon Adelson was a close friend of mine, a great Zionist, a great leader. We all speak about his philanthropy, but I want to share with you his involvement in diplomacy. He took part in many historical decisions. One of them is that moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. She always told me, don't be shy about your Zionism. Speak up for Israel, fight for Israel. And he did it day and night, and we are grateful for that.
Coming up, Iran is already challenging the new American president. How should he respond?
Now, for a limited time, you can get 5 of CBN's critically acclaimed documentaries. Experience the rebirth of the modern state of Israel.
The historic bonds between the Jewish people and the land of Israel cannot be broken.
Relive the battle for Jerusalem in the Six-Day War.
Jerusalem is yours, forever.
Discover how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
When people need us, we volunteer and we come and help.
Explore the world of Israeli technological innovation.
We're people of dreams. God gives us dreams. And that's really the roots, I think, of much of our innovation.
And understand the biggest land dispute in history.
Many Palestinian Arabs claim that the Jews stole Arab land. But is that the real story?
This exclusive Israel DVD collection can be yours for a gift of $40 or more. Call now or go online to get your Israel DVD bundle today. A new wave of anti-Semitism is sweeping the globe, and the Jewish state faces hostility at every turn. Now is the time for Christians to support Israel. In CBN's free booklet, Why Christians Stand with Israel, you'll discover why Christians support the Jewish state and why we must stand together with the Jewish people. Get your free copy today. Call now or go to cbn.com/standwithisrael.
Watch breaking news, in-depth exclusive stories and programs from health to entertainment you won't find anywhere else. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. Enjoy credible news reporting from around the world. Discover inspiring programs and stories of hope, all in one place from a Christian perspective. The CBN News Channel, a perspective you can trust. To watch the CBN News Channel, download the app or visit cbnnewschannel.com.
All eyes in the Middle East are on the transition of power in Washington right now, and one country is already testing President-elect Biden. While most of the focus is on Iran's nuclear program, Israeli Brigadier General Asaf Orion says there's more to Iran's battle strategy.
What we're actually looking at is Iran's regional effort, which is running in parallel to its nuclear effort. The stage is set for the Biden administration. The overarching theme is, of course, the nuclear talks. But while we focus on the nuclear as the most severe threat, we shouldn't overlook Iran's dual strategy of doing also indirect proxy warfare across the Middle East.
With more on the Iranian aggression and how President-elect Biden will need to respond, I interviewed Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg. Joel, thanks for being with us on Jerusalem Dateline. And tell us about this webinar that you had this week on All Israel News.
Thank you, Chris, for having me back on the program. Look, since we started All Israel News and our sister site, All Arab News, on September 1st, but there's so much anxiety that we're finding in emails, text, social media that we're receiving by people in the United States, but other places around the world about the transition. Obviously, what's going on in Washington has been hugely controversial, very painful to watch. I'm just grieving that, having lived in Washington for 24 years. But there's also a lot of, okay, well, now what? Where is the Biden administration going? How will that affect Israel? How will that affect U.S. policy towards Iran? Because President-elect Biden is saying that he is going to go back into the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, i.e. the Iran nuclear deal. What does that mean? And Iran is now saying they're going to 20% enrichment of uranium, which really puts them in the category that they would be dangerously close of being able to build nuclear weapons from that pretty quickly. I would just remind the audience that Prime Minister Netanyahu, he said this at his UN speech a few years ago, this is the red line which Israel would have to attack. So these and many other issues, what are the next countries that are going to go into maybe into a peace treaty with Israel and so forth? These are questions we're getting.
Just following up on Iran, do you see this lays out the possibility of a direct conflict between Iran and Israel over the nuclear program?
Iran is provoking a conflict. I think a big question is whether President Biden and his team can figure out a way to stop them. I mean, negotiation would be a good way to do it. Nobody wants a war in this region. Again, we're in a relative season of quiet compared to the last 20 years of, since 9/11, let's just say as our benchmark. And we've had wars in Iraq and wars in Afghanistan and civil wars and implosion of Syria, the rise of ISIS, the caliphate, genocide. It's just been horrific. But Biden is going to be tested. And Iran is already saying, essentially, we're testing. They grabbed a South Korean tanker near the Straits of Hormuz the other day. They're driving towards 20% enriched uranium, which is just sort of the borderline between low enriched uranium and high enriched. And when you move past 20, the technical process to get to in 95%, military grade, weapons grade uranium is actually not that much. I know the numbers sound small, 20%, you got to get to 90, but technically from the experts that I talked to, it's really a fast process after that. The major work is done below that. So I think the central question, Chris, is this: has Joe Biden and his team of advisors carefully reviewed the mistakes that President Obama made in the deal with Iran that so angered Israel, that so angered the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis and the Bahrainis and other Arab states who felt and were completely left out of the negotiating process, but also the flaws in the deal that didn't deal with missiles, that didn't deal with terrorism, that didn't deal with any of these other issues, and left all these loopholes. So have they learned those lessons? And I would say, has the Biden team learned the lessons of Trump, who set aside the current issues that everybody's upset about, but when you deal with Iran policy, the maximum pressure campaign has been quite effective. And that could create an environment in which the Iranians would come back to the table and actually make serious concessions rather than going to a war. But all eyes are going to be on Biden. And if he flinches in the light of Iran's intransigence, it's going to be a very troubled season ahead.
Up next, prophecy fulfilled in pictures, the first 70 years of Israel's existence.
CBN Films presents.
It's a very corrupt period in Jewish history at this time.
Written in stone, Jesus of Nazareth.
The emotion is one thing, but the scientific truth is something else.
The life of Jesus changed the entire world.
Jesus walked on this particular street.
But what does archaeology say about where he lived his life?
It's an authentic location in the life of Jesus.
Join Gordon Robertson and unearth remarkable discoveries.
Is it really the place where Jesus spent his last night on earth?
Explore where Jesus traveled.
Jesus went from one Jewish place to another Jewish place.
Where he performed miracles.
And he raised the little girl from the dead.
And where he was tried by Pontius Pilate.
Tradition is wrong.
Get Written in Stone, Jesus of Nazareth. For a gift of any dollar amount, call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/writteninstone.
That changes everything.
Here, we're committed to a heritage of rigorous scholarship, dating back over 1,000 years.
And to a faith tradition dating back 1,000 more.
This is how we create a culture of inquiry where no topic is off limits.
And a culture of hope.
Anything's possible!
It's Christian leadership.
And it's changing the world for the better.
It's higher learning.
It's greater knowing.
It's what makes us whole.
It's what makes us regent.
Nearly 3,000 years ago, Hebrew prophets wrote of how the land of Israel would be transformed. Here's a book that shows the remarkable and even prophetic changes in Israel during the first 70 years since it became a nation. 150 years ago, famed author Mark Twain visited the Holy Land and wrote, "It was a desolate country and a silent and mournful expanse."
He talks about up in the Jezreel Valley, he talks about how that you can travel in 10 miles in any direction and not see a single person. And so one of the towns that we did some photography was of a small town of Afula, which is really off the map as far as many Westerners are concerned, but it was established in the early 1900s. So 50, 60 years after Mark Twain, there's a small Jewish settlement. And today it's a booming Israeli city that we've been able to match side by side perfect photography with it.
Doug Hershey and his team chose 200 photographs of Israel from the 1880s to the 1940s. In his new book, Israel Rising, The Land of Israel Reawakens, Hershey chronicles the changes from that time span until today.
That's been part of the joy. I mean, we have these old photos of Tel Aviv of less than 100 years ago of shacks on sand dunes with camel caravans on the beach, and to compare it from the exact same angle today, it's just stunning.
The book follows Ezekiel's promise, where in chapter 36, verse 8, the prophet declared, "But you, O mountains of Israel, you shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people Israel, for they are about to come."
We think of prophecy being to kings or to people or nations, but he's prophesying to the land that when Israel returns as a nation, branches will put forth fruit, waste cities will be rebuilt, people and beasts will be multiplied on the land will be cultivated and sown.
These side-by-side photos show the transformations. Here's Jerusalem near the King David Hotel in the 1930s, and the same view today. This is the Hebrew University campus in 1925, and what it looks like now. From the north in Haifa to the south in Beersheba, Hershey says the pictures represent the prophet's words coming alive.
We're living in a really profound time in history. We're living in a time where 2,700-year-old prophecies from Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, they've been lying dormant for about that long, and many of them are coming to pass. The most repeated promise through the scriptures is that God will bring his people back to the land, and when they do, there's going to be these dramatic changes, and we're seeing those.
Hershey says the land itself seemed to be waiting for its ancient people to return.
To me, it's one of the most profound things here, is this land has been conquered 15, 20 different times. It never becomes a homeland for any other people group, and the land would never produce for any other people group. And Israel moves back in, and suddenly the vast desert wastelands are now producing flowers, they're producing fruit. Isaiah 27 talks about how that when Israel returns, Jacob will take root and fill the earth with fruit. And for many centuries, believers would read that and look at that as allegorical or spiritual, and we're finding today it's very literal. It's happening right now.
Hershey says the book provides a visual opportunity for those who have never visited Israel, and it's also struck a chord with the younger generations.
Most millennials are ready for something real. They want to see something practical. It's as far as much of perhaps theological Christianity that they've been raised on, and more ideas. They're ready for something solid. They're ready for something real. And so even now when I speak in the States, sometimes I'll have questions about theology or the questions about the land, and usually my answer revolves around, let me show you. Come with me to Israel, I'll show you myself.
Hershey sees Israel as a miracle.
Absolutely. I mean, Israel is the time clock, as many people have heard and have said, and I believe that as well. I mean, there's so much that is happening here in a very short amount of time. To me, it's one of the most profound miracles of our day.
Still ahead, accessing CBN News in the times ahead, even in the Garden Tomb. Thank you for watching Jerusalem Dayline. We're committed to providing you with unbiased reporting from the Holy Land. Through weekly broadcasts, podcasts, and online media, our vision is to reach millions around the globe with the true story of what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, all from a biblical and prophetic perspective. This is a big vision and is only made possible by the generous support of people like you.
Call us toll-free at 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/Jerusalem Dateline and make a donation that will help spread the light of truth about Israel throughout the world.
Roman soldiers destroy the Second Temple of Jerusalem. Centuries of eyewitnesses say the temple treasures survived. But where are they?
They went from Jerusalem to Rome, Rome to Carthage, Carthage to Byzantium.
Historians are silent about what happened to it next.
CBN Documentaries presents the worldwide release of Treasures of the Second Temple.
So does it still exist today?
A story of mystery.
Where is it?
Calamity. Most of the victims were butchered. And destiny.
The possibility to dig is impossible.
Get your copy of Treasures of the Second Temple. Yours for a gift of any amount to CBN Documentaries.
It has the power to influence weight loss, boost your immune system, and improve brain function.
We've seen an explosion of data on the role of the gut microbiome in health.
The free Build a Better Gut booklet reveals the latest information about the gut microbiome. you'll discover how your gut affects the rest of your health.
The gut microbiome has been linked to depression and cancer and heart disease.
Learn how to build a stronger, healthier gut.
The microbiome, if it's in good composition, are really protecting us all the time from more invasive things.
Get the Build a Better Gut booklet, free from the Christian Broadcasting Network. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/buildabettergut.
You need to make sure that your microbes are working with you, not against you.
And if you order online, you'll get immediate access to the Build a Better Gut series, a digital copy of the booklet, and related bonus material. Build a Better Gut today. Call 1-800-700-7000 or go to cbn.com/buildabettergut for your free copy.
During these uncertain times, we want to make sure you're able to access all of our CBN News and CBN content directly to your phone or device. I visited the Garden Tomb recently and received an incredible testimony of our CBN News and other CBN apps. Take a look at what Cesar Fleitas had to say. Hi, I'm here in the Garden Tomb with Cesar Fleitas.
That's right.
And Cesar, you were just telling me something about the CBN News app. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. Well, we have a little device, that turns, your TV into a smart TV, and we're looking for apps, especially news, and we came across the CBN app, and it's the CBN Family, and also you have the CBN News, and you can watch, and stream, all the programs from CBN directly on your TV. But also the CBN radio is available on it. You get to listen to worship, and it's phenomenal, and we love it. It's one of our favorite apps.
Why do you like it so much?
Because I have access. It's at any moment, especially if I miss Jerusalem Dateline, then I can go back and then watch it again at any moment, because it's recorded and stored there.
Well, it's a great endorsement. So you would recommend people to download the app?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, we watch it, and also Superbook. We have a little daughter. She's 3.5, and we love watching the Superbook show. So we get to watch it with Mariah as
So when you're saying we, you're talking about the whole family.
The whole
either
family.
Superbook, the CBN News.
That's right.
CBN Radio.
Every Wednesdays, at home we have something called the FFC, the Fleitas Family Church at home. So with my wife and my daughter, we watch, together a Bible story, and we have a discussion. And we like to use this Superbook material because it is very solid, very close to the biblical text, and that's the reason why we like to use that as a resource for our, teaching at home.
Well, that's great. Great to hear about your church. And thanks, Cesar. I'm so glad you enjoyed the app and the Superbook and all the CBN programming.
Oh, praise God. Well, thank you, guys.
Yeah. So take a look at that. Download the CBN News app, as well as all the CBN programs for you and your family. Cesar, thanks so much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
By the way, that was an unrehearsed and, as you can see, heartfelt testimony. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content, as we heard, through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.